Okay, what's going on, everybody? My name is Mang, and welcome, well, I guess not back, just welcome to a Call of Cthulhu one-shot called Revelations. This one was written by Caleb Stokes as part of his No Security set of horror scenarios set in the Great Depression. It's not, it's systemless, which means that you could use this for any generic system or a horror system or something like that. But since we're all familiar somewhat with Call of Cthulhu, that is what we chose to run this one in. And so the other scenario that I've run as part of this set has been Bryson Springs, which was another really well-written scenario. This one is a bit more, I think, cinematic and a bit more crazy. I'm not sure if it's strictly better than Bryson Springs. They're both really good and entertaining. This one I feel like is a bit, perhaps... Bryson Springs was a bit more, like, structured, I guess. And was more kind of just like a story that you could go through. This is kind of just like, look at all this shit that's going on, it's crazy, you know? So I guess I'll give kind of the backstory for the scenario, and then I'll talk about the specific session that we had for it. So Revelations takes place in 1938 in a small kind of farming town called Toil, Illinois. And Toil did kind of all right for itself during the Depression. They had kind of a thriving soy agricultural industry. So it did well during the Depression, where a lot of other towns didn't. But things are about to get pretty bad for Toil, Illinois. There was a kid in Toil called Andrew Yerta, who was the young son of the local minister, Reverend Yerta. And this kind of whole scenario deals a lot with religion and the Christianity and the Bible and stuff like that. It's not like preachy or anything like that. It just involves that theme a lot. You know, it's very much like Christian Armageddon kind of stuff. There's a lot of Bible verses, and it's in kind of the Bible Belt when everybody was very much involved with religion and things like that. So they even have like a disclaimer that it's very much pulling heavily from the Bible and stuff like that. So Andrew, the young son, was basically a complete 100% prodigy. Like, you know, we're talking like Artemis type stuff. So basically, picture Artemis, but if his dad was like a devout reverend during, you know, a very religious time of America, I guess. And so Andrew was kind of pushed towards the faith and replacing his father someday as the head of the church. And by the time he was... Okay, the boy first gave testament at the age of 7, and by the time he was 11, he was giving full-blown Sunday sermons. In truth, the theological density of his analysis would have been difficult for an experienced biblical scholar to follow, not to mention a congregation of simple bean farmers. In spite of dense content, crowds from every surrounding county flocked to experience the disconnect between the boy's small stature and the sophistication of his preaching. People felt the only explanation for his skill was divine selection, and the elder Yerta was content to let them believe. So yeah, basically Artemis giving very deep Christian sermons. And by the time he was 16, he was the co-pastor of the church. And so he was kind of well-liked by everybody in the town and all that kind of stuff. Except one day, he went to help a shut-in. Well, no, he went to help an old kind of woman suffering from stomach cancer and blah, blah, blah. And he was sent there to help out along with the daughter of the sick woman, Mary. And so the two basically got down to some hanky-panky. Andrew kind of just buckled from the pressure of his father and the township and all that kind of stuff, and Mary was just kind of a slut, so, that's not fair. That's very sexist. I apologize. They both had their issues, because Mary was like a shut-in for her entire life, and blah, blah, blah. And so they banged, and they were caught banging. They were caught knocking boots. And so they were both very much ostracized, because, you know, Andrew was like their great hope, you know, just like unblemished by sin and all that, like chosen by God and blah, blah, blah. So they were both kind of ostracized, and Andrew went off to... Andrew fared even worse. The boy punished himself more harshly than his father ever could, though it didn't stop the old man from trying. The boy thought himself damned forever to hell, and Reverend Yurta would not even let the boy make confession to the townspeople whose faith he had defiled. On a lark, some months earlier, Andrew had written an essay to an obscure German divinity college inquiring about a specific biblical interpretation in the Book of Numbers. The school had been so impressed they offered the young genius a full scholarship, and he was sent away across the ocean, more in exile than triumph. And so apparently at this weird German theological school, he was a bit weird even by their standards. Like, he never left, he really never spoke, really never ate, and just was in, like, the deepest of theological studies. And so, I'll sum it up somewhat quick. Basically, like, there's a bunch here. Like, I could read all this, it's pretty interesting. But basically, his theology, was that God... Like, his theology departed from pretty much everybody else's. And his theology was not God is dead, or that God never existed, but more that God abandoned us. God, like, looked upon humanity and was like, enough of this shit. I'm done with you assholes. I'm out. And he just left. Just gone. And so this is what Andrew came to believe. And so then, after he realized that, well, he called this the deserter God. Then he came to try and figure out a way, how do I bring God back? And that's kind of the dangerous part. He would use the forbidden knowledge of the universe's new ruler to bring about the return of biblical truth. Andrew would infuriate his God back into existence by worshiping something so abhorrent and base it escaped the notice of even the most brutal pagans. Thus, in an attempt to save his own soul, Andrew Yurta made Earth a living hell. And so the entity that he, like, discovered through, like, some really, really obscure shit, Lovecraftian mythos tomes, is called Newt Is, or Not Is. I mean, Not Is kind of what it is, I guess. It's spelled Nought-ISS. So Newt Is, I guess, but anyways. So this entity, like, Caleb goes into a whole description of this shit, but it's like, this guy, like Caleb Stokes, who writes all this shit, this guy is a genius in my opinion. Like, the stuff that he puts together and writes, oh, it's, Lovecraft would be so freaking proud, man. Newt is not like a physical entity, as the way we think of a lot of other ancient ones or great old ones or blah, blah, blah. Like, he's almost more like a concept. Like, he is like Caleb basically describes him as like a metaphor. Like, he is a deific metaphor. It's really crazy. To sum it up, to really kind of a layman's version of it, is basically Newt can take something that is either part of a language or liturgical or something like that, and can take it and write it into existence. And so like, you can do this ritual, I guess, to summon Newt Is into, like, a focus, and he will take that and write it into existence. And so I guess if you summoned and did this whole ritual, which involves human sacrifice and mutilation, all that, so, you did this, and you did it for, like, a piece of paper that just says, it's raining, or something like that. He would take this information and just interpret it into our reality, and it would be raining, okay? So Andrew's bright idea is basically he used the New King James Version of the Bible as the focus for this ritual. And so Newt Is took the Bible and interpreted it into reality, which is a terrible, god-awful idea because, as many people will tell you, although not all people will tell you, the Bible is not exactly meant to be taken literally. And so there's a lot of metaphor, and there's a lot of allegory, and there's a lot of poetry. And so when you take it all literally and just interpret it in reality like a machine, like a computer parsing language, yeah, you get some problems. And so that is what has happened in this scenario. The group is all plain members of the police force in this town, and they are starting work on the morning that this ritual has just been done. Okay. And so thus we have the apocalypse, pretty much. So, yeah, I told them all that they were going to be plain members of the police department. And that is not the greatest setup, I guess, because it somewhat limits character creativity. When you're just playing normal Call of Cthulhu, you can be like anything. It doesn't really matter. You're probably going to die. You could be a mailman. You could be a bank teller. You could be a scientist. You could be a professor. You could be a policeman. Whatever. You can just do stuff. But when you say you're all policemen, okay. But I'm like, it's a small town. It's a farming town. You could be just doing this as a part-time job or just whatever. You could be volunteering, whatever. So we had a couple men that were pretty much just kind of career policemen for the town, born and raised, all that. We had Trist, who was played by Ren, who, he was not born in the town. He came here. We don't know exactly what his former career was. But now he just kind of works for the police force. And then we had Ricky Shree, played by Charlie Chalk, who was a big city Chicago homicide detective, and he was sent here to kind of investigate a murder that the local Hicks couldn't solve. So he was just kind of here for a few more days, and technically he was still supposed to be helping the police force, so he's part of the crew. And so they start in the police station, which is also run by a woman named Winifred, who is just an old widow that helps out the police force by being the dispatcher. And there is a cat there as well named Rufus. And so basically the day starts with her saying, the phones have been ringing off the hook. It's the busiest day we've had in a long time, so get out there. And basically there are 14 different locations pretty much where stuff is happening. And you can do this in a number of different ways. You could plan this all out, the route that the events are going to take place in, and kind of plot it out. You could go in order, or you could just roll like 1d14 and just pick them. And that's what I did, because I was just like, let's just see what happens. So the first one that they got was at the Silver Branch Tap Room, which is the only bar in town. And it is, let's see, Mr. Jeffrey, God bless him, says that Tugger's doing something sick to his nephew down at the tap room. I don't know, sounds like he might be hitting the poor child again. And so they all got a good laugh about a guy named Tugger doing something sick to his nephew and blah, blah, blah. But they all crowded into the squad car and headed over there. And they found they found the boy, who was 16. He's an orphan. He's taken care of by his uncle Tugger, who is kind of abusive, and doesn't really like him. But he takes care of him, gives him room and board as long as he works all day at the bar. And so they go in and they find the boy doing handstands with like tears rolling down his face, and his like all the blood is going to his head and stuff like that. And they find like the whole bar, which is like a bunch of the drunken louts that just spend all day there. It's like 9 in the morning. They're all just laughing and jeering at the boy, and Tugger is not really, he's kind of joining in. So the police comes, the Popo comes in, and they put a stop to that pretty quick. And so they start talking to Tugger, and he's feigning, innocence. Like, I didn't force him to do nothing. I just suggested it to him, and he just up and did it. And they kind of kept pressing him, and he confessed that earlier this morning when he was cooking, the kid, Jacob, bumped into him, and he got a little angry, and he's like, before you bump into me again, put your hand in the fire. And the boy did immediately put his hand into the fire for like 5 seconds and wasn't about to pull it out, so Tugger had to yank it out of there. So he thinks something's maybe wrong with the kid's head. He's getting suicidal. I don't know. Shenanigans, basically. Shenanigans. He uses the word shenanigans. So they go talk to the boy, and the boy is acting pretty strange. He constantly refers to Tugger as Master, and he says that he will do whatever Master tells him to. And so they're getting kind of fed up with this whole situation. This ain't right. They're trying to get answers about, maybe this kid was brainwashed or drugged or beaten, he's beaten into this submission, or, what's going on. When Tugger kind of, under his breath, offhandedly says that that kid should go lay in the road before he comes back working here. And the kid immediately bolts for the door in a sprint. And they try and grab him, but he's too quick, too light on his feet. So he gets out the door, and they yell outside to Trist to grab that kid. And so Trist tries to grab him, and manages to grab him, but like just as he's about to lie down in the middle of the road. So they handcuff the kid. They handcuff Tugger. They clear out the bar. They do, like, examine the entire bar. Because, remember, they don't know that this is, like, an apocalypse that is about to get really serious and way more involved than just this. They just know that there's some weird shit going on at this one bar. They don't know what the one shot is about, and this is why it's really cool. So they're, like, looking over this whole bar, trying to figure out, like, this, they don't know it's the apocalypse. I didn't even say the name of the scenario, because I don't want to tip them off. So they don't know if there's something with, like, poison, or mind control, or there's something with this Tugger guy, he's the main villain. Like, they don't know anything. So they really search it down, but eventually, they hear Winifred over the car radio saying, I rolled again on the list, and we got, okay. That old gossip Jessie May got herself all in a tizzy about Jenny and Penny again. She called me just a second ago saying they'd done poisoned her. Can you believe that? Better get down there before she causes another scene like last fall. So I explained to them, to the locals at least, that Jessie May is the town gossip, and Jenny and Penny run the only restaurant in town, and they say that they are sisters to everybody, but it's really no secret that they are lovers. And Jessie May has kind of always had it out for them. Considers them heathens and vile fornicators and blah, blah, blah. So they decide that they, they want to put these two in, like, the holding cells or something until they can sort this out. But they also want to go check out this restaurant. So they send 2 of them to go to the restaurant and the other 2 to go kind of take care of this. And they figure that, okay, this kid's doing whatever Tugger tells him to. So they tell Tugger to say to the kid, go to sleep. Which was probably not the best choice of words, but okay. So Tugger says, hey, kid, go to sleep. And so Jacob immediately like smashes his head into the side of the car and goes unconscious. So now they have an injured boy and this guy in handcuffs. So they go... Oh, no. They go back to the police station. They drop off Tugger, put him in the holding cell. And then they talk to Winifred. And they're like, you know, we're going to take this kid to go to the doctor. And she says that the doctor is at the public school. He just called in and he needs help with a patient. Sounded really serious. And there's only one doctor in the town. It's a small town. So she suggests that they leave the kid here, and she'll look after him until they're done with the doctor. And they're like, okay, fine. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, they go in and they find Jessie May, the gossip, is sobbing hysterically at one of the tables. And, like, everyone in the restaurant is, like, really, like, confused and concerned with what's going on, including Jenny and Penny. Because this is kind of bad for business. So, one of them goes to, Ricky Shree goes to comfort Jessie May and find out what happened, and, the other guy goes to check out Jenny and Penny. So, Ricky finds out that, like, apparently when she tasted the bread, when she bit into this piece of bread, like, it tasted like ash in her mouth. And, like, he can see that there's, like, soot on her chin. And she is just crying uncontrollably. And so he tries to comfort her and, you know, calm her down and really figure out what happened. And finally, he, like, cuts open the bread and doesn't see anything. It seems perfectly normal. He, like, tears a piece off, seems normal. And then he, like, licks it. And it immediately tastes like ash. And his eyes begin to, like, well up with tears. And so he, like, spits and he throws it on the ground. So the other guy's talking to Jenny and Penny and trying to figure out what happened. And they have no idea. They just served her, you know, her bread like they do all the time. And she suddenly started crying hysterically and saying that we poisoned her, and they have no idea what's going on. And so they're, you know, this is bad for their business, and they're offering like a free lunch to anybody because of all this fuss. And so he turns around. He's like, "Do any of you customers have problems with your food?" And at that exact point, he sees Ricky spitting out the bread and crying. So the other two arrive as Ricky heads into the bathroom to kind of clean his face and stop crying. At this point, like, customers begin to start kind of filing out because apparently the only restaurant in town is poisoned. One of them, well, Trist, I think, asked for like a cup of coffee just so he can make a Twin Peaks reference. And then another one of them asked for a fresh piece of toast. And he takes a big bite out of it, and it immediately tastes like ash, and is as if he took a giant hunk of ash into his mouth. So he spits it out, and he immediately begins crying, and basically the rest of the customers leave, and, you know, Jenny and Penny are like, "What the hell is going on here? Somebody poisoned our supply." So basically a couple of them are kind of crying at this point, but they're not sure what to do, and so they tell Jenny and Penny to head down to the police station so they can, you know, question them and blah blah blah. Figure out what's going on here. The other two stopped in because they were on their way to the school, but they stopped by the lunch counter on the way there to kind of pick up the other guys. So they all get back in the squad car and they head down to the public school. And there they are met by the doctor, Doc Coughlin. And so Dr. Coughlin is somewhat, I don't want to say excited. That's too positive, I guess. Anxious, perhaps. He's very anxious. And he says that he came here to because he got a call that one of the teachers, Miss Weber, had a serious medical condition going on. And so when he arrived, he found her, the teacher, in the hallway crying and desperately clasping her hands over her mouth. And the children in the room, the classroom, were basically running amok and having sliding contests across the floor, which was apparently covered in a thin layer of moisture. And so Dr. Coughlin kind of quarantined the woman into a storage closet and waited for the police to arrive. And so he's kind of leading them to the storage closet while telling them that he strongly insists that they should establish a quarantine of the entire school to contain an outbreak of whatever is going on here. It is airborne, and yeah, he makes it sound pretty damn serious. And so a couple of them go check out the classroom, and they find this thin layer of moisture, but it looks like basically somebody took a bucket of water and just kind of splashed it across the floor. Trist goes and checks out the woman in the storage closet, and he finds her just kind of very terrified. Her hands are clasped over her mouth, blah, blah, blah. And he asks her some yes or no questions. And basically they establish that, you know, this moisture is caused whenever she kind of like opens her mouth. And so the doctor's just like, you know, to kind of establish what is going on here and, you know, figure this out, I'm going to need her to replicate the effects. And so they get her to say 1, 2, 3. And while she's doing that, while she says it, finally, hesitantly, basically mist begins pouring out of her mouth at more pressure than the human lungs could normally do. And it doesn't obscure her words or anything like that, but is definitely like water, mist coming out of her mouth as she is speaking. And so she very quickly clamps her hands back over her mouth. And so Dr. Coughlin is concerned about this. He's not sure where the moisture is coming from, but if it is internally generated, it could very much lead to fatal dehydration if this spreads around and people are just, like, the kids are just talking a bunch to get mist out of their mouths. You know, it could just kill them. So again, he says that they should establish quarantine. So, Richard Mundy, the Great White Hope, he goes to immediately establish a quarantine by setting up police tape and things like that, which is not how you set up a quarantine. Like, they needed like tents and things like that, but it doesn't matter a damn thing if they set up a quarantine or not. The apocalypse is coming. And so the secretary informs them that there is currently a class outside in the recess yard. And so Richard goes out there to kind of check up on the kids and see if any of them are spewing mist or anything like that. So he goes out there, and it looks like just a normal recess yard, blah, blah, blah. Kids are playing on crappy kind of wooden playground equipment. And there was a sandbox, and there was a bunch of kids in the sandbox. When suddenly, in front of his very eyes, like above the sandbox and around the sandbox, there is suddenly a massive swarm of insects. And the air is pierced by the sounds of children's screams. And so These insects are blood-sucking lice. And there are a lot of them. Let me see. Let me just see. Okay. Jesus. That is a ridiculous number. I don't know. This doesn't sound... I don't know if this is right. But okay. Let me explain. I'll explain two different things. Okay. So there are 14 different locations, pretty much, where they're going to be checking up on calls and, complaints and things like that. Each location has 3 different sections related to it. These are called acts. And so each location, Act 1, is if they go there during, like, the first part of the session, and this is where things are really, like, the most mild. Like, so for Act 1, at the bar, is the kid that just obeys everything his master says. Act 1 at the school is just the woman that spews mist when she talks. Act 2 is where things start to get a bit more serious, and the players know that, all right, this is dangerous. This is where the violence and the blood and the bad stuff, people start dying. So Act 2 for the school is the sandbox turns into lice, blood-sucking lice. Act 3 is where it's like, okay, this is very clearly the apocalypse. Act 4 is the end of the session where basically they fail and all of reality pretty much just tears itself apart. If you get to Act 4, you did not win, and it's pretty much just thematic. Okay, so for each act, then, each act has an associated Bible verse. And so this is what the entity, the newt is basically interpreting into reality from the Bible. So each thing has its own Bible verse. And so I guess what Caleb did is he's like, I don't know how, like, it's so cool. I don't know how he picked out the Bible verses or which ones if there was like I don't know. I don't know how he did it, but he's got all these different Bible verses. And so they each kind of have an effect on reality. So for Act 1, for the public school, is Deuteronomy 32, verse 2, which from the New King James Bible is, my teaching shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass. So I guess Newt is interpreted this as the teachers speaking dew out of their mouths, okay? So it's really cool because everything has its own verse. Act 2 for the public school with the lice is Exodus 8, verse 17. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and smote the dust of the earth, and it became lice in man and in beast. All the dust of the land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And so basically, Newt is interpreted this as the only source of sand in the town, which is the sandbox at the school, every grain of sand turning into a blood-sucking lice. And so according to this guy, I don't know if this is to be believed. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to... like, how many grains of sand are in a sandbox? This guy said 700 trillion, but that doesn't sound right at all. So I have no idea. But the answer is a shit ton. A shit ton. And they all turn into blood-sucking lice and swarm the kids that are playing there and start spreading outwards. So, Andrew and Richard, who were kind of witness to this, they rolled sanity, and Richard basically went temporarily insane, short-term insanity from witnessing this, and he got suicidal mania. And so he interpreted this as basically diving into this locust pit to save the kids with no regards for his own safety or life. Problem is, it's basically a fool's errand. Like, like, basically, there is enough lice to cover every millimeter of your body, and they are all sucking you dry. Like, that is just, it's just a massive amount. So the kids are pretty much already dead before he even got in there. The other teacher that was on duty tried also to dive in there and save him, but she got pretty much killed instantly. Well, not instantly, but she's no good. Richard did take a whole bunch of damage, and basically, long story short, they did end up saving one kid, partly thanks to Trist having very good medical knowledge, and they took him right to the clinic, ignoring all other things. All they cared about was saving this one little kid's life. So they did do it, but Richard did get hurt a bunch. So yeah, and then so basically the school just abandoned everything. Everybody just like ran screaming out of there, and this was kind of the signal that yeah, shit's about to get real. So they all eventually got back in the squad car and started driving away. And they hear over the radio from Winifred that Mayor Ford at the agricultural fair at the city hall is swearing up a storm and saying that, you know, you better get there quick like. And so a couple of them were like, you know, we got dead kids and blah, blah, blah. And like, oh, there's going to be a lot more dead stuff. It sounds of it so bad. And so they drove right past this. There's a map. So they drove right past the city hall, right past the fair. And so a couple of them, Andrew and Ricky, got out, whereas the other two went to the clinic. So they're at the city hall, at this fair. And so now, from this point, since I went to Act 2 for one of the spots, because basically it's a one-shot, I wanted to finish this in one session, so I needed to kind of accelerate things. We could have been on Act 1 for a little while, but I needed to accelerate things quickly, so I'm like, okay, we're on Act 2, so that means that when they go to the City Hall, I can't start with Act 1. Act 1 happened, but they weren't there for it. So Act 1 for the City Hall is basically during the agricultural fair, like, all the animals started dying because of some, like, some sort of infection. And so the Bible verse that this is based on is Exodus 9, verses 1 to 7. The plague on livestock from, you know, from Egypt. The hand of the Lord will bring a terrible plague on your livestock in the field, on your horses, donkeys, and camels, and on your cattle, sheep, and goats. All the livestock of the Egyptians died, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, basically all the livestock died. So, yeah, if they went there during that right away, they would find just animals dead for no real reason. Investigating the food and water reveals no contagion of any kind. And characters with medical experience note that the afflictions facing the creatures makes no biological sense. But they got there during Act 2, which is when the mayor is up on kind of the grandstand at the podium trying to explain why, you know, a bunch of these events have to be canceled. And while he's kind of explaining that, Ricky and Andrew are kind of in the crowd listening. And they all see a big puff of smoke come up in the crowd. And they're like, oh, what the hell's going on here? So they kind of start investigating, and then another puff of smoke. And then another. And they see, like, this woman, like, screaming and clawing through the dirt. And so the mayor kind of steps down and starts trying to go investigate this. And another guy goes up to the podium to take over. And he suddenly stops. Stops frozen immediately. He starts, like, teetering forward on his front foot. And then he falls on his face and crashes into a million particles of dust. And so there's this slight silence and pause. And then basically chaos and anarchy just explode from the mob. And so Andrew and Ricky are basically caught in the middle of this mob. And so they kind of get trampled a little bit. They do take some damage, but they do manage to finally get out of there. They don't explode. This is based on Psalm 90, verse 3. you turn men back to dust, saying, "Return to dust, O sons of men." You know, or from dust to dust. So they don't turn to dust, because obviously that would be pretty bullshit. They do get trampled a little bit, but they make it out of there. But now, definitely, the town is in full chaos at this point. You got kids dying, you got people exploding, and they're not even witness to the other things that are going on in other parts of the town. Like I said, there are 14 locations, and they have, during Act 2 now, they have visited 2 of them. And so far, kids are being eaten by insects, and people are exploding into dust. So, yeah, you can imagine what's going on at the other locations. I'd like to say I had enough time to just kind of read what's going on, but basically, like, there is localized thunderstorms going on. There's a guy that basically, like, gets covered in shit. I guess that's not very extreme. The restaurant basically just explodes into flames. Revelations 8 verse 7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast on the earth, and the third part of trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. So there's a fire at the restaurant. What else? The localized thunderstorm, which also is covered in bees, because of course. At the dump, there is just an ungodly amount of flies, and what else? No, there's basically a guy that just like takes a baby, like a baby in a stroller, and unless the cops stop him, he basically like is gonna snap it over his knee. That's pretty effed up. I'm kind of glad they didn't get to that. It's pretty screwed up. Here's a good one. I really wish they got to this one. 2 Kings 2 verse 23 to 24. And he turned back and looked on them and cursed them in the name of the Lord. And there came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood and tore 42 of the youths. It's just like, why is that shit in the Bible? It's ridiculous. And so, yeah, if they go here, which is at the agricultural supply store, there's just a bunch of guys, like, having lunch when suddenly... one of the guys, just as a joke, says, "God damn you, Jim." And suddenly... Oh, here, I'll just read it. Then there are bears. There just are bears. 2 gigantic grizzlies appear out of nowhere and start mauling Jim Flanagan to death. And they just keep killing from there, chasing down the fleeing workers, bashing down the doors of the building if they try to take shelter. There are only 38 men on the workforce, and they won't stop until 42 are men. 42 men are dead, and the Grizzlies don't care if the PCs join that number. So yeah, just 2 bears just appear out of thin air and just start mauling everybody to death. That's just crazy. So that's Act 2 going on. So anyways, Ricky and Andrew manage to get into the city hall, where they find the mayor and a bunch of his council members, I guess, have holed up and basically gone into full apocalyptic mode, full religious apocalyptic mode, and they have equipped themselves with improvised weapons and are spouting things about the flesh of the sons and daughters. I think this is where I skipped like right to Act 3, because I was like, all right, let's just keep going with this apocalypse theme. We'll just go right to Act 3. So yeah, Mayor Ford has basically completely lost it, which happened very quickly, but it's a one shot. And so they basically ended up killing the mayor and his entire council of officials in the city hall. Just blew them apart with shotguns and revolvers. So that was cool. Trist and Richard decide that they just want to get out of town. They don't want anything to do with this, so they just want to go. Which apparently is something that's likely to happen in this scenario, so of course they've thought of that. So they got on Route 9 and they started heading out of town. And there are a couple of cars in front of them of other people trying to get out of town. And they see the cars in front of them just basically fall off the edge of the world. And so basically what has happened is the town and the little surrounding area has basically been cut away completely from the rest of existence. It is 100% isolated. There are no phones. Nothing. Like, it is just perfect 90-degree angle, just cut. There is no escape. And at the four corners, oh here, this is from Revelation 7 verse 1. And after these things I saw four angels standing on the four corners of the earth, holding the four winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And also apparently from Psalms 104 verse 5, who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. So, yes, it was removed forever from the foundations of the earth. And so they go and they see at the four corners of this area, there are large pillars, and guarding the pillars are four, basically, angels with flaming swords. And so they decide not to mess with the angels, and they drive back into town because apparently there's no escape. And they decide, okay, we're going to go to the church because they heard chanting at the church. The other two get out of the city hall, and they see that across from the city hall, in where basically the park is, a giant, dense forest has sprouted up out of nowhere. And at the back end of the forest, near the river, which is now turned to blood, there is a massive, massive tree that looks hundreds of years old and is covered in strange red fruit. Yeah, even someone with, cursory knowledge of the Bible can probably guess what that is. So, of course, they're like, well, we got to check it out. Because at this point, you're in one-shot mode. You don't really care. You just want to see what cool shit's going on. So they go over to the massive tree, through the forest, and, of course, Ricky tears off one of the fruit of the tree, which is red and doesn't look like any fruit ever, and he takes a big bite out of it. Okay. I guess, yeah, if you don't know, in Genesis, I guess maybe I should get the specific verse. Genesis 2 verse 17, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat thereof you shall surely die. Now, of course, in Genesis, this is somewhat metaphorical, or allegorical perhaps, because Adam and Eve did not immediately die. But Newt is like, well, whoever eats this shit is going to die. Done deal. Written. And so, yeah, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Interestingly, I guess Newt did not literally interpret this as good and evil. He just interpreted it as knowledge of everything. It's just the tree of knowledge. And so when Ricky bit into this fruit, he gained immediate knowledge of everything. I think there's an SCP kind of related to this. I don't. Oh man. Now I want to look it up. So much of this is like SCP stuff, because a lot of the SCP writers do take stuff from the Bible. Yeah, SCP-028 is like a storage yard that when you enter into it, you get total and complete knowledge of a subject. Like, just in its entirety. Every phone book entry for New York City in 1998. Like, the subject is completely random. And so, like, the subject is completely random, but sometimes it's like a couple of the document logs are just like one guy went into it, got knowledge, and he's just like, this is not life, and then he passed into a coma and died. So it kind of reminds me of that. It's just total knowledge of everything that we know about, that we don't know about, just everything. And so the player that eats this it's kind of funny. Again, it's just, Caleb, he's so good. He's my man. He's my man. The player that eats this gains complete knowledge of what is going on and who Newt is, and how to stop this completely, who Andrew Yurta is, what he's done, everything. Complete, total knowledge. But they also gain the knowledge that they're about to die a very painful death. And also they are having massive seizures. And so basically I had to tell Ricky in private messages, like, yeah, you know everything, you know all that's going on, you know who Andrew Yurta is, how to stop it, blah, blah, blah. He has information about the ritual in his home, in his room. But also you're about to die. And you're having a seizure. So if you just want to get out 2 words, I'll let you kind of squeak it out. And so he basically managed out the words Yurta and home. And I'm like, okay, you die. Actually, no. Like he coughs up like a part of his lung. And Andrew, who's standing there watching him have a seizure, he's like, are you okay? And then he just takes his revolver out and shoots him in the head. And he dies. Otherwise, he would have just died from an internal hemorrhaging. So, yeah, that's good. Okay, so they all basically... Well, okay. I knew this was going to be a long episode, which is bad because it's late. The other 2 go back to the police station where they try to basically... They want to go in and get all the weapons, but they find that it's barricaded up. So they talk to Winifred on the radio, who says, you know, I'm just sitting here, it's not barricaded, I'll open the door, and yet it's still barricaded, nothing's happening. So they think that maybe she's in like some other dimension, blah, blah, blah. So they eventually do break in. And they do get all the guns, they get gas canisters, they get everything they need. It doesn't matter at all, but they get it. They find that Winifred is gone. The Tugger and the boy look like they've been blown apart with shotguns. But Rufus the cat is just sitting there grooming himself, because cats are the only thing that will survive the apocalypse. Because not even a Lovecraftian deity of metaphor and objectivity is going to kill a cat. There you go. And so they meet back up with Andrew near the church. And they were about to head into the church, which would have been pretty cool. Because basically, like, the Reverend, of course, is at kind of the center of this whole religious hysteria. And so he's basically been preaching this whole time to anybody who came to the church to listen. But during his kind of sermon, he pretty much, like, started coughing. Well, yeah. So this is Jeremiah 15, verse 16. Your words were found, and I did eat them, and your word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of my heart, for I am called by your name, O Lord God of hosts. So he starts coughing, and eventually, amongst much blood and bile, Yurta pukes up a number of fleshy bits in odd shapes. The giblets are sheathed in the same pallid flesh as the sacrament, and pulse in the same veiny, disgusting manner. Especially educated characters might recognize the bits as characters from Aramaic alphabet. Superbly knowledgeable officers could spell out the chapter and verse Yurta quoted before coughing up the fleshy label. So he's basically like coughing up the words of his sermon in Aramaic. More disturbing than the regurgitation is the palpable urge everyone feels to put the pulsating letters in their mouths. It takes serious willpower to resist this compulsion. And then finally, Act 3 is John 6, verse 53. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. And so basically, people are just like going to this frenzy of eating all this flesh and these fleshy words and the living bread, and they guzzle these bottles of blood from the wine, and other people that choose to try and resist are basically just dying, you know, like within minutes. So yeah, it's a frenzy. It probably would have been good. It would have been like the scene from Kingsman, basically, which would have been really cool. But yeah, they probably would have died in there. So they decided then to go to the Yurta home, which is a couple blocks away, and that was within the middle of like this localized storm that was just like raining hailstones the size of baseballs. So Richard Mundy took one to the head, but other than that, they made it there. So they go in, they find the dead body of Andrew Yurta, and he died from Deuteronomy 32 verse 33. Their wine is the poison of dragons and their cruel venom of asps. So he basically tried to drink a bottle of wine, and it was actually a bottle of snake venom. So he died very painfully. And they end up kicking the door to his room, and they find, like, basically his room was like the guy, like John Doe's room in Seven. Just, like, madness and crazy shit just everywhere. And so Triss started trying to decipher this stuff about Newt is and, like, what's going on here, and I gave him a very basic rundown of it. Meanwhile, they found, like, this secret basement under his room, and they found his, like, rituals chamber, and they found a map of the town and the farm just outside of the town, the Hanson farm, circled, and like, this is the spot, blah, blah, blah. So they deduced that they needed to go to the farm where this ritual occurred and try and undo it somehow. So they get back in the car, they drive over there. Meanwhile, the town is basically like being ripped apart from the fabric of reality. Like nothing is, like, this is no longer a biblical apocalypse. This is insanity. At this point, I kind of forego. I didn't bother with sanity rolls because it was just like, that doesn't seem like the most interesting way that this can play out. It's just they go insane and they crash into a building and die. It's like, okay. So they get to the farm, they find the barn, they open up the barn, and I'll just read this section because it's pretty interesting. Okay. Hanson's hands and back have been lashed to a post, even his forehead bound unmoving against the wood. His eyelids have been cut off and his torn sleeves flutter to reveal track marks where Yurta injected him with strange experimental compounds over the course of days. The dirt and walls around him are scrawled with all manner of nonsense in white paint, unintelligible words written in unrecognizable characters. The dead man's glazed stare focuses across the barn to a sick altar made out of his family's corpses. Disemboweled and dismembered, Elmer's wife and children have been arranged into concentric circles around what appears at first to be a miniature tornado. In the eye of the storm, somehow contained by the human remains, a single leather-bound book appears to float. Like, damn it! This guy... Oh, Caleb, such a good writer. I know I can't stop praising him, but like that's so effed up and it's so great. It's just yes. Yes. And it's just like I love it so much when I can just read off these paragraphs and it's just like, yeah, you see that in your head, you know what's going down. It's effed up. And so yeah, basically there was like this Bible that was kind of floating in this vortex around these, like, this concentric circles of bodies and, like, viscera and stuff. I'll just read this whole section, because it's just so damn good. I know it's running a little long. The dead innocents served Yurta less as a sacrifice and more as a symbol, a representation of all his victims' worldly concerns. Elmer was kept in a drugged fugue state for days, forced to literally overlook the butchering of his family, his perception used to lash Newt Is to the earth. By the time he passed away from endless tortures, his perception had been shaped and focused by Andrew's strange manipulation of the objective tongue. His death made the object of his unblinking gaze the new foundation for reality, a copy of the King James Bible. Even if characters recover from the grisly sight, gazing upon Yurta's mad work sears the mind. The Bible appears to swirl in the vortex, but at the same time it blinks into the shimmering text of the word book or truth. The words written in the wind just as suddenly translate into hundreds of other languages, shriek the sound of those words, expand into verses that whip around, a dizzying flurry of language, sound, and raw meaning. Beholding the thing as it sprawls in every realm of perception simultaneously is maddening, and approaching the bloody nexus just makes things worse. Characters can feel their skin turn into the mere idea of skin. Each outstretched finger becomes the word finger, letters curling away and being ripped into the maelstrom surrounding the book. To reach into the circle flails the body and mind at once, and there is no hope for any who dare to physically touch the nothingness that is Newt Is. Yes. Like, that writing is just so damn good. So, Only someone willing to sacrifice body, sanity, and soul can reach into the vortex and rip the book free. So basically, if they had known, like, most of Andrew's shit was written in German, including, like, the main book. So if they had known German and really sat down and interpreted this, they didn't have time to do that even if they did know German. They could have potentially unraveled the ritual normally, but the brute force method is basically just, like, ripping the book away from all this and just ending it, which requires the total horrible, horrible sacrifice. And so who better to sacrifice themselves than the great white hope, Richard Mundy, who dived onto the book and basically had his entire existence flayed apart and was written out of existence entirely. And so basically, like, time was rewritten back to the start of the day before any of this really happened. Although technically, I guess it would have been a few days ago, because the family. Yeah, I kind of messed up the ending a little bit. But I guess it would have been a few days ago, because technically the family was totally unharmed, whereas normally they were tortured for days. But anyways, time was basically rewritten where none of this happened. Everyone was back to life, except for Mundy, who was written out of existence. Ricky was alive, but he had no knowledge of anything that happened. The only people that did know what happened is Trist and Andrew, because they were present, like, at the nexus of all this. And so they kind of just woke back up in the barn, and the Hanson family was kind of very bewildered that there was police here. Obviously, Trist and Andrew were very bewildered at what was going on. Yeah, if I had done sanity rolls, obviously, they probably would have been both completely 100% insane, but I was like, screw it. So they immediately, like, went back to the Yurta household, and they went to speak to Andrew, who was just kind of sitting there in his room, which was still kind of crazy shit. And they were like, we're going to need to take you in. They basically, like, told him everything that all of his darkest, like, we know that you summoned Nutiz to bring back God, and blah. He's like, he had no idea how they knew about this shit. He was really concerned. But he's like, we're going to need to take you in for questioning right now. He's, like, he couldn't really argue, but he wasn't going to say anything without a lawyer. But of course, they didn't take him into the police station. They took him out into the field. They took him out. They put a gun to his head, and they're like, either I kill you right now, or you don't ever attempt to do this again, because shit went bad. And he's like, okay, I'll never do it again. But of course they knew that he was lying, so they're like, fuck. And so they shot him. They shot a, like, 24-year-old prodigy because of what apparently he might do. And so, yeah, Caleb kind of underestimates, or maybe he doesn't, but he's like, they must bear witness, but the indignity of knowing that Andrew Yurta sits alive and well in his room might be too heavy a burden. Will the officers drive to the man's home and murder him in cold blood for sins never committed? Will they allow him to live despite his responsibility for erasing their noble friend's very existence? What if he tries to do it again? Yeah, they shot him in the head, and that's where we ended, but of course the two of them went away to prison for a very long time, because it's not like they could really hide that shit. The mother Yurta, like, knew that these cops had Andrew in custody, so yeah, it's a open and closed case. And so yeah, they definitely prevented that from ever happening again, but they definitely killed a kid in cold blood, but I guess they don't really care. And that is Revelations. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I think everyone else enjoyed it quite a bit. It's if I was a crueler DM, obviously there was no way they would have ever succeeded. They would have gone insane or died much sooner. And I somewhat rushed it, I guess, into a few-hour one-shot. We could have made all the acts much longer. I jumped from Act 2 to Act 3 very quickly. But it was good. It's not an easy scenario to run, though. I guess I could have been way more prepared. I only read through it like once, and it's one of those things like when Act 2 happens, like every part of Act 1 happened across the whole town, and so you need to like keep track of everything. And so when they go to a location, like during Act 3, like Act 1 and 2 happened here, they just weren't aware of it. And so it's kind of like you're juggling all this stuff, and like all the stuff that happened during Act 3 during the whole town, and like when they came out of the city hall, I noticed that they were right across from the park. And so I was like, oh shit, what happened at the park during Act 1 and 2? And so I found out, oh, like this whole fucking forest just popped up while they were there. And now, oh, there's a freaking tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's like, oh, I'll mention that. But yeah, like the locations that they did not visit at all were, let me check. The bridge, they didn't, I mean, they went across it, but I didn't really mention it all. But stuff went down at the bridge. The church they didn't actually go into. The funeral home they didn't go into. The dump, the grocers, the agricultural supplies, the Masonic Lodge, the Sewell residence. So a bunch of all things that all have 3 acts that they didn't go to. So I could probably, I mean, I guess I probably said too much to them, but I definitely could. You could have the same group of people and run through this scenario twice, and it could be very different just by sending them to different locations. Very well written, very well put together, crazy shit. Yeah, Caleb Stokes, just a damn good writer. I'm really looking forward to running or playing in all the rest of the no security scenarios, because he's just such a good writer. Yeah, so I'd like to just read through the rest of this stuff because it's so good, but if you want to read through the rest of all these crazy like events and stuff like that, you can download the PDF for free. It's just No Security Revelations. You'll find it. All right, so that is that. I don't know exactly what's going to happen next week. It could be Numenera. It could be some more Call of Cthulhu. It could be, I don't know. Could be anything. We're just kind of going week to week here. We might get a campaign of something going on again in the near future. Could be Numenera, which I have to kind of brush up on. I don't exactly remember how it plays through. But my name is Mang. This has been Roll Manging for Revelations. And I'll see you fine folks next week.